You already know this story. You were probably taught it at school. There was an island in the middle of the Pacific, further from anywhere than almost any inhabited place on Earth. The people who lived there became obsessed with carving enormous stone heads, and to move them they cut down trees. They kept cutting. They cut down every tree on the island, including the last one, and when the forest was gone the soil blew away, the crops failed, the society tore itself apart in war and famine, and by the time Europeans arrived there was almost nobody left. It is one of the most repeated cautionary tales in the world. It appears in books about climate change, in economics lectures, in television documentaries. The island is small and closed and finite, which makes it a perfect model of a planet, and the moral is always the same. This is us if we are not careful. There is a problem with it. Over the last 20 years, archaeologists working on that island have taken the story apart piece by piece, and most of the pieces do not hold. So here is the question. What actually happened on Rapa Nui? Because the forest really did disappear, and the population really did collapse, and almost every link anyone drew between those two facts turns out to be wrong. Start with where it is. Rapa Nui, Easter Island, is a triangle of volcanic rock about 160 square kilometers, roughly the size of a mid-sized city. The nearest inhabited land is Pitcairn, some 2,000 kilometers west. South America is 3,500 kilometers east. If you were to draw a circle around it containing no other people, it would be one of the largest such circles on the planet. Polynesian voyagers found it and settled it. The old textbook said around the 4th century. A re-examination of the radiocarbon dates pushed that forward dramatically, and the current best estimate is somewhere close to the year 1200. That matters, because it compresses everything that follows into a much shorter window than the story usually assumes. And then they carved. There are around 900 moai on the island. The average is about 4 meters tall and 12 tons. The largest one ever raised onto a platform is nearly 10 meters and weighs something like 80 tons. In the quarry at Rano Raraku, still lying in the rock where it was being cut, there is one that would have stood 21 meters tall. About 400 statues are still in or around that quarry in every stage of completion, which is exactly what a lot of people point to as evidence of a society that stopped mid-project because everything fell apart. It is worth knowing what they are, because the parable tends to present them as vanity. They are not gods and they are not portraits of kings. They are ancestors. Each one was raised on a stone platform belonging to a particular family group, and each one faces inland, watching over the settlement of the people it belonged to. The eyes, made of white coral with dark stone pupils, were only fitted once a statue was standing, and that was the moment it became active. So this was not decoration. It was the physical infrastructure of a religion built on descent, which is a fairly ordinary thing for a society to spend its surplus on. The forest part is true. Pollen cores taken from the crater lakes show that the island really was wooded when people arrived, and that the trees really did go. The dominant species was a giant palm, related to the Chilean wine palm, and it is now extinct. You can still find the molds its roots left in the volcanic soil, so a forest existed and then it did not. That much is not in dispute. The question is what ate it. Here is the first piece of the story that breaks. When the Polynesian settlers arrived, they did not arrive alone. Every canoe carried the Pacific rat, sometimes deliberately as a food source, sometimes not. Rats have no predators on a small island and they breed at a rate that is difficult to imagine. Starting with a handful of animals, a rat population on an island like this can reach the millions within a few years. And Rapa Nui palm nuts, the ones archaeologists dig up in caves and shelters, are covered in the marks of rat teeth. A large proportion of the recovered nuts have been gnawed open. A palm forest can survive people cutting trees. It cannot survive a rat population eating the seeds faster than the trees can replace themselves, because then nothing new ever grows and the forest simply ages out. The people cleared land, certainly, but the reason the forest never came back is more likely to have been the animals that came ashore in the bottom of their boats. The second piece to break is the statues themselves. The classic version says the moai were dragged on wooden rollers and sledges, which required timber, which drove the deforestation. It is a satisfying image, a society cutting down its own forest to feed its obsession. But the islanders always said something else. Their oral tradition says the moai walked. For a long time that was treated as poetry. Then archaeologists looked closely at the statues abandoned along the old roads and noticed that they are not shaped like the ones standing on platforms. The road statues lean forward and they have a wide, D-shaped base. That is the shape you would design if you wanted to rock something upright and swing it forward, step by step, using ropes. In 2012, a team tested it with a concrete replica weighing 4.5 tons. 18 people with 3 ropes walked it down a road in under an hour. If that is how the moai moved, the statues did not require a forest at all. The third piece is the war. The collapse story needs a violent ending, and for decades the evidence for one was a class of obsidian objects called mata, found all over the island in the thousands. They were described as spearheads, and their sheer number seemed to prove a society that had descended into fighting. Researchers went back and measured them. The shapes are wrong. They are broad and irregular rather than pointed, and a systematic analysis concluded they are not designed to penetrate anything. They look far more like general-purpose cutting tools, the kind you would use to work plants. There are also very few skeletons on Rapa Nui showing the injuries you would expect from sustained warfare. The Great Per-Contact Civil War is not really visible in the archaeology. The fourth piece is the most surprising because it is the opposite of collapse. Instead of failing to cope with a treeless island, the islanders engineered their way around it. They developed a technique called lithic mulching. You break up volcanic rock and spread the fragments across your fields, sometimes in enormous quantities. The stones slow evaporation, protect roots from wind, moderate the soil temperature, and release minerals as they weather. These rock gardens cover a substantial fraction of the island's usable land. They are visible from the air. Building them took enormous, sustained, organized effort, and it is the effort of a society solving a problem, not one disintegrating. So when the first European ship arrived on Easter Sunday in 1722, what did it find? Jacob Roggeveen's crew described a functioning island. People came out to the ships. There were cultivated fields and food and canoes. Estimates from the early contact accounts suggest a population in the low thousands, on an island whose farmland could reasonably support that. That is not the aftermath of an apocalypse. That is a small society living within its means on a hard island. What happened next is the part the parable leaves out. In the 1860s, ships came from Peru to take laborers for the Guano Islands and the coastal plantations. Over about a year, raiders took an estimated 1,500 people from Rapa Nui. That was somewhere close to half of everyone on the island. They took the king. They took the priests and the scholars, the people who could read Rongorongo, the island's writing system. After international protest, a small number were sent back, and most died on the voyage. Roughly 15 made it home, and they brought smallpox with them. Then came tuberculosis, and further waves of disease, and the annexation of the island in 1888, after which the population was confined to a single settlement, while the rest of the island was leased out as a sheep ranch for most of the following century. Here is the number that matters. In 1877, the population of Rapa Nui was 111 people, not depleted by a slow ecological unraveling over centuries, reduced to 111 in about 15 years by kidnapping and by imported disease. And Rongorongo, the only writing system ever developed in Oceania, became unreadable because the specific people who could read it had been taken away and had died somewhere else. There is one more thing the parable gets backwards. Every moai on the island was eventually pushed over. Not one was left standing by the end of the 19th century, and every statue you see upright today was raised again by archaeologists in the 20th. That toppling is usually presented as the war, rival clans knocking down each other's ancestors as the society ate itself. But the statues were still standing when Roggeveen came in 1722, and they were still standing, at least some of them, when Cook came in 1774. The pushing over happened afterwards, across the decades when disease and raiding were emptying the island, which suggests something much sadder than a war. The moai were ancestors who were supposed to protect the people beneath them, and they were pulled down during the exact period when it became obvious that they were not going to. It is worth being careful here, because this is an argument between researchers and not a settled fact. The older reading still has serious defenders, and nobody claims the islanders had no effect on their environment. They cleared land, the forest went, some of that was them. But the chain that the parable depends on, from deforestation to starvation to war to self-inflicted collapse, is the part that keeps failing when people go and check it, which leaves an uncomfortable question about why the story stuck so well. It stuck because it is a very good story, and because it flatters us. A closed island, a foolish people, a self-inflicted wound, a moral we can take home. It let us look at a society and say, they did this to themselves. The moai are still there. About 1,000 of them, carved by people who were not collapsing when they carved them, on an island whose forest was eaten out from under it by rats and whose population was destroyed by ships arriving from somewhere else. They are not a monument to a civilization that failed. They are a monument to one that was doing rather well, right up until the moment that had nothing to do with them.